I'm very, very excited to host this panel discussion. We had great discussions already in small panels also already. And I think, let's say, this panel discussion is in that sense different, that it has experts from industry, which is where I guess a special angle happens, where vision and curiosity meet reality of the market. And so this is going to be very interesting. We have three panelists. First is Veera Anantha, who's founder and CEO of Constant Therapy Health. Ryan Field, in the middle, a former CTO and now CEO of Kernel. And Roy Gilron, lead neuroscientist of Rune Labs. I think slowly we're complete. Our three guests represent neurotech companies that are in the progress of translating or have already translated neurotech products to the market. And they cover quite a range of solutions, from development of new brain imaging equipment to using wearable smartwatches to monitor proxies for Parkinson's disease symptoms over time, to providing AI-driven apps to help people recover brain function after brain injury or neurological disorders. So, well, first, the kind of way we organize this is we'll have short talks where each of you will introduce your work and your mission for around 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll open the panel discussion. So we basically move the questions after the third talk, and then we start having the open discussion in the way that we had it before. And I think the idea is really to make it interactive and not only one way, and try to continue figuring out the challenges and maybe also some of the wishes to academia, what needs solving. But so without further ado, we'll start with Veera Anantha, and please come forward. I'll swap places with you. Thank you. Yeah. I should see your slides in a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Try it out.
All right. Thanks for having me here. I'm Veera Anantha, founder and CEO of Constant Therapy. We use AI to deliver brain rehabilitation at large scale. And the way we do this, and we're a Boston area-based company, and with roots here actually at Boston University, where some of the research was initially started and commercialized. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the way we do this is Constant Therapy actually provides a few different apps that are used either by patients and by clinicians to be able to get speech, language, and cognitive therapy that patients can do on their own at home. So what you see on the left there is the program that patients use. They download it on their iPad or other type of digital device. And typically with Constant Therapy, for them, it's as though they have an AI, they have an expert clinician who's with them at all times. So they're able to do therapy whenever they want. And this is for cognitive and speech and language rehabilitation. We also have a program that is used by hospitals, by healthcare professionals, speech language pathologists, and other types of clinicians to be able to deliver therapy to patients and also to monitor the patient's progress. And by the very nature of this being digital, one of the advantages is that you can really collect a lot of data and use that to really significantly improve the care that patients can get. The reason Constant Therapy works, and this is from one of the studies that's been published, is that what you see on the left is what typically happens when patients get quote-unquote standard of care rehabilitation today. They might get maybe once a week therapy. And what you see on the right is what actually happens when you enable patients to be able to engage in the therapy independently on their own. So you have a lot more consistent evidence-based therapy that the patients can do. Obviously, the key is to be able to make it so that it is actually engaging for these patients and to use the AI to deliver care that can really be personalized for these patients. So today, I'll just give you where we are today. We have now delivered over 275 million exercises to patients through our platform. So it's really used at wide, large scale. You can see a little map there on the left there. It's showing you where the program is. It's really used all over the US and other parts of the world now. The program has touched over 700,000 patients' lives now, and it's used broadly across, especially across the U.S. By clinicians in various types of healthcare settings. The program is FDA. We have the FDA breakthrough designation, so there's a growing body of clinical evidence around constant therapy, and we are constantly looking to increase that evidence base. And equally importantly, though, as we have seen this platform evolve and be adopted, what we're also finding is that the data that is in the program itself, trying to get rid of this. Oops. Okay. The data that's in the program that's available through the platform, because we have such large scale, is itself actually starting to inform how each individual patient progresses. That type of data was never ever available in a systematic way before. So this, for example, shows you anonymized data from different patients who have been using the program, and the gray is indicating, we call this the brain fingerprint, essentially for different areas of their cognition, where did the patient start and where are they at different points in time. So you're able to do that at an individual level. Clinicians can use this, for example, to make informed decisions, and this is what's happening today at large scale, as well as patients' family members can really see where their loved one or themselves are, how their progress is going. Equally importantly, as we look at the amount of data, the scale of data, this is essentially real-world evidence that you can generate using this data. And there is now an effort to actually use this type of population-level data to be able to gain new insights into rehabilitation, to improve the science of rehabilitation, neuroscience itself. So what you see there, I won't go into the details of this study, but this study was looking at 2,000 plus patients and looked at what is the right dosage of therapy to be given to patients. And you generally find that more therapy does lead to better outcomes, which is great as long as it's evidence-based therapy. But also, equally importantly, if you see the top two lines there, which are sort of merged together in that graph, that's actually giving you an idea of what is the right dosage to use, because 4 days a week as well as 5 days a week of therapy gives you about the same outcomes. So this type of insights was just not possible before, and we are looking to enable this type of research as well as advancing the science of rehabilitation and neuroscience in general. I'll just end this with the research is really important to making all of this happen, but at the end of the day, this all comes down to how can you actually change patients' lives? So I'll just end this with a little video here. Hopefully this plays.
I am a teacher, and I had the AVM. For like 3 months, I didn't talk at all. A constant therapy is miraculous for me. And when I go to doctor's appointments, I take out my constant therapy and do tasks until my name is called. And then on the ride home, I will be doing constant therapy. And every year I have made progress. Even the superintendent of Lynn Public Schools just saw me Tuesday, and she said, "Mary, you talk almost perfect." And I said, "Oh, thank you."
All right. So with that, I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you.
All right. I don't yet see my
Slides
slide.
swapping in progress, probably.
Well, while they're coming up, I can introduce myself. So I'm Ryan Field. I'm currently the CEO at Kernel, and I'm an engineer by background. So I spent most of my training and prior parts of my career developing sensors. And I joined Kernel about 6 years ago to start building a new type of sensor that would ultimately be used in our systems to measure the brain. And over the last 6 years, I've worked with the team to build multiple versions of our product. And about 1.5 years ago, I was asked to take over and lead the company and kind of set our strategy going forward. So I'm happy to speak with you all today about what we're doing at Kernel, and I think really lay out, for those who don't know or maybe have some idea what Kernel is, how I think about Kernel. So first, as you might imagine, as an engineer building technology, we're a neurotechnology company. We have developed a system based around time domain FNIRS. So it uses pulsed laser light, which allows us to get better depth resolution and absolute measures of hemoglobin concentrations. So it's a really unique technology stack, and my background just happened to be in LiDAR. So I was measuring pulse time of flight before I joined Kernel, and I came and took all those sensors and adapted them for measuring the brain. But we're not just a neurotechnology company. We work directly with pharma companies and other companies developing products for the brain. So those could be med device companies or consumer products companies that have certain hypotheses that they want to test, and they don't have the neuroscience expertise to kind of do it on their own. So we support them doing this, and that's kind of like the second bucket of what we do at Kernel. But perhaps the most important, and one of the things that I think is really going to be a big part of the future in Kernel, is developing our own clinical biomarkers. We do our own clinical research, and currently we're working in psychiatry and neurology offices, collecting data with patients to better understand some of the early signs of things like mild cognitive impairment, or to build up biomarkers that predict response for depression therapies. And so I think this is a really important part of our work, and it's much more than just building technology and putting it out in the world. It's actually doing some science in a clinical setting so that we can move all the great research that's been done and bring it into real clinical use settings. And to me, that's the kind of, I guess the next slide here, the vision for neuroscience in the everyday world is, I think, you can think of neuroscience in the everyday world on a spectrum. And at one end, it's using these tools in the home kind of regularly, constantly. On the other end, it's just getting it to where people who need it already are. And so if you think about the 1 billion+ people in the world that have some form of mental illness, or the 100,000 people that need assistive devices, or the 100 million people, the tens of millions of people who have neurodegenerative diseases, there's a lot of need out there for these tools. But I don't think as a field we've gotten these tools to where the patients are. The patients who need them are already going, and that's the neurology and psychiatry or other primary care type settings. And so I like to just think about the vision as this balance between our long-term ambition, which is to make neurotechnologies and measuring the brain in everyday settings ubiquitous, right? Like as common as everyone's cell phones and smartphones. But then kind of near-term execution. It's like, what do we do to get there? And I think to get there, we need to first build out a few very clear, strong clinical use cases where there's a clear unmet need that we can solve with the technology we've been building. And so the challenge is, I think anyone here who's tried to measure the brain would agree. I mean, you heard some of the speakers earlier. Measuring the brain is hard. Building new technology is hard. Even if you're in the engineering side, working with device physics and pushing the limits of that is challenging. Building new technology to measure the brain is exceptionally hard because you need a really talented, multidisciplinary team. And then to try and do that in the real world, you need that clinical expertise or that end product expertise. And it's really just this complex landscape of being able to bring the engineering and the science and the clinical care all together in order to do something meaningful. And I say here we need a win because I think that for the field to kind of continue getting funding and the support that it has and technologies like ours, we really have to show where the value is to certain either patient populations or groups of people. And so I would like to see neurotechnology generally, anyone using it in a more widespread use case. And I think that will really advance the field further. And I'm happy to talk about it with our panelists, because I think they've been doing a lot of good work in kind of getting out there and reaching a large population. So then applications, I already mentioned kind of the things that we've been focused on at Kernel, which are depression. So we're not looking at trying to diagnose depression. What we're looking at are signatures in the brain that predict response to treatment for depression. We're looking at detecting early signs of shift in cognition, so changes in cognition that predict cognitive decline. And then I also think it's really interesting to start thinking about or looking at neurodevelopment. So I often will be talking with investors, and the thing that becomes immediately clear is that almost none of them have ever had their brains measured, right? You're in a room of people like this, and most people here have probably tried EEG or FNIRS or volunteered for an fMRI study, but most investors have never had their brains measured. Most people in the world have never had their brains measured. And I think neuroscience in the everyday world should be about changing that and making it more commonplace to measure our brains throughout our lifespan. So with that, I'll end and hand it over to the next one.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone. My name is Veera, Gilron, and while this is coming up, I'll introduce myself as well. I'm the lead neuroscientist at Rune Labs. And I guess what Matthias, who invited me, was trying to do is kind of get representatives in industry from digital therapeutics to non-invasive recording of brain activity to some of the work that I did when I was a postdoc at UCSF with invasive recordings of neural activity. So I'll share some of the work I did as a postdoc and how some of that evolved and kind of was combined to the work we do today at Rune Labs. I want to start with a paper that came out last week in the New England Journal of Medicine. Teresa did a really good job of introducing the challenge of kind of being locked in with ALS. And this amazing paper really showed the use of a speech neuroprosthesis that was able to decode 32 words a minute at 90% accuracy with an invasive technology. So the potential there, combining that with the LLMs, that's how they did achieve this performance, was really unbelievable. And they were able to do that. The proof here was really how much hours the patient has used this. So it was really quite impactful. And a little too quickly. This is work that the team at UCSF did after I left, and thank you, Nicole, for kind of showcasing the kinds of recordings that exist here. And what they did over here is they measured brain activity, and then were able to, with this very small device that was implanted, react to that activity in real time to produce essentially therapy for these patients that was better than what they could get with kind of current standard of care. And I highlighted in orange the little part that our current company plays in this, which was how they train this classifier to react like that in real time, which really was the use of wearables in part. And I think that's a big part of how something like this works. That and the combination of really having the necessary data sets large enough to do so, and a really good model-based understanding, we talked about that earlier today, of how this works. And part of this model in PD, for example, is based on the fact that there are specific frequency bands that are associated with the signs and symptoms of Parkinson's. We call them oscillopathies in the field. And one of the interesting things are that these oscillopathies overlap with the normal physiological functions that also often appear as an oscillation. And maybe as a way to showcase that, one of the last data collection projects I did in the lab, also one of the most enjoyable ones, was able to really perfectly capture that and also capture what an invasive device allows you to see in the wild. And this is work that one of the neurosurgeons there did in the end. And what you see over here is one of the patients was invasively implanted. You see him over there, kind of farther in the camera with, he's a Parkinson's patient that happened to be a ski technician. And his job was to monitor, ski lifts to make sure they're safe. And he has this same device implanted with a computer in the backpack that he's wearing. And you see real-time, time-domain neural activity activity while he's doing, an activity like skiing. And what is impressive about, these invasive technologies, on the top you see subthalamic nucleus and the bottom motor cortex from the left and right hemispheres, as you can just see single activity, spectral signatures of his activity. Notice what happens when he stops. So, I think that's some of the power that we get from being in the brain. And this is a device that, is being used right now. And those that are familiar with Parkinson's also recognize these signatures. They know what they mean. So I think that's one of the things that's unique about that. And what we do at Rune Labs is really try and empower patients to do, such activities. So we're a precision neurology company, and we help patients manage their care via symptom medication tracking. They wear an Apple Watch, they have a patient app, and we provide them with personal summaries, data-enriched care workflows, and different advanced therapies they can choose from. And similar to what Brian was talking about, the kernel does, we also work with pharma companies that are trying to deploy new drugs and bring them into the market by giving them, more sensitive readouts to what they're doing in terms of the outcome metrics. And what that looks like is it's just a daily companion for people with Parkinson's disease. It allows them to log their symptoms, their influences. We have 510 clearance to capture tremor and dyskinesia from them, which is some of the hallmarks of Parkinson's. And it gives patients insights into their behavior. A lot of these patients are taking medication 6 times a day, and they're trying to time them, things like that. So that's a lot of what we do. And we're fortunate that LLM technology rapidly kind of entered our life in the last year or two. So we're able to actually use that to summarize a lot of the rich data that the patients are giving us and give that back to the patients. And Justin talked about this earlier, actually, when he talked about, seeing some of these reports and making a clinical decision. We see that all the time with our clinicians that are using our platform, where they're suddenly able to see something that they were not able to glean from a patient report and do it in a more efficient manner from a time perspective. So we have almost 10,000 patients that have used our devices. We're in 150 clinics in the US and a good number of clinicians that are using this. And we hope that a platform that it's this big will really allow us to do something different in this field when it comes to the volume of data you need to bring new therapies to market. Finally, I want to end on the kind of invasive side of things. So I think there's really important lessons to learn when it comes from previous devices that have not worked out. So on the left, you see Second Sight, which was a visual neuroprosthesis, and they were able to go all the way to get regulatory approval. They got approval to get insurance companies to pay for their device. It was $150,000 per device, which is 5 to 10 times more than current deep brain stimulation devices. But ultimately, it was too costly to deliver the therapy. So we need to figure out a way to do this with the right cost structure. And then on the right is Neurovista, which is another similar company that did the same thing in epilepsy and ended up leaving patients stranded. So device abandonment in this field is a real problem that we need to think about. And when you think about the adoption of this, I really like this image that Lauren Hammer, which is a previous colleague of mine at UCSF, made for a symposium that was organized earlier this year by Tim Dennison and Helen Mayberg, the National Academy of Sciences, about what it takes to bring a new technology to market. So the clinical benefit really has to be there to get the patients and the clinician to go through the effort of getting, especially an invasive device. So I think that's important. They've done a lot more. There's a really great booklet that summarizes this, but these are the 5 stars that they highlight and I think really need to be aligned to get a new product into market when we think about kind of the neuroscience of especially invasive therapies in the real world. So, the researchers have to come up with the technology, and the industry the device usually has to come up from the industry. Individuals have to want to get it. The regulators have to approve it. Insurance companies have to pay for it. And the health professionals, they'll want to put in the time to learn the new technology. And at Rune, we're really focused on the health professional aspect of things. We work together with the insurance companies, also with regulators and bringing new therapies to market, and very much so with individuals, being the kind of with our direct-to-patient model. And we collaborate with researchers on the research part of things. Like we have a project together with Nicole on OCD, and it's the things that these are some of the things that we enjoy doing. So look forward to having a discussion, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Roy. Okay, so we basically can start with questions now. Please think what you would like to discuss. Maybe to get started, I find it interesting. So neuroscience in the everyday world, so far I think we understand, when we say this, we understand going from lab to outside of the lab and, you know, real world, let's say, naturalistic environments. But it's also academia to industry, and maybe often from group level to single individual analysis, or you know, that's kind of another interesting aspect, I guess. It gets harder to analyze the data when we're not looking at group level analysis. And I think I just would propose we can start with you describing a bit these particular challenges that you had to overcome to the point, you know, where you are right now in the field, and maybe later we can also more and more discuss, let's say, wishes. What would be nice, you know, to see developments in academia that could actually help progress your individual applications further. But maybe we just start with some of the challenges. I think we all know there's a lot. So it's fine to talk about them. Yeah, whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I mean, I guess how much time do you have for challenges? There's too many. I think some of those challenges were starting to get outlined here a couple of minutes ago. But some of the, you know, the way I think about what we've seen in terms of challenges is that, you know, you have to prove the clinical efficacy. In healthcare in general, there are so many different stakeholders for these types of technologies, and things that can truly benefit patients for them to actually take hold. It's just, so you have the insurance companies that oftentimes may or may not pay, and you have the healthcare professionals who have a certain workflow that they might need to follow, and you know, the process that you're bringing to market may not fit with that. So there's those kinds of challenges in addition to the you know, clinical efficacy. So we've been able to we've seen a lot of that play out at Constant Therapy. We've been able to overcome, I would say, some of those things by having the clinicians as stakeholders, as part of the process to be able to deliver the therapy. So use them as your, you know, as your partners. That's been very effective for what we have seen play out. And the other challenges I would say is, and I'll give an example of what we saw. You have to build you know, whatever technology you're building. In a randomized controlled trial or a clinical trial, there's a lot of control in terms of getting people to be able to do certain things that you want them to do, that you're trying to measure. But in the real world, most of that doesn't actually exist. So you have to actually figure out how that system or program or device that you're implanting, how is that actually going to work end to end in terms of adoption by users, by patients or clinicians, if multiple parties are involved. And that you know, is not as easy as it seems. You can't actually predict what is going to happen. So, for example, with Constant Therapy, we serve a lot of stroke patients. You know, these people can't read, sometimes they can't write, or they can't speak, and you would wonder, you know, how is it that they would be able to use a program downloaded and off of you know, the App Store or from Google and use it. It turns out you can do that as long as you actually are helping them along the way in the right ways. I won't get into all the details, but an example that we saw, we couldn't have predicted this. We couldn't have known this unless we actually observed what was happening. For stroke patients, you know, many of these stroke patients are affected, so their right side is paralyzed, and many patients are right dominant. So when they're using our program, we actually have a mode built into the program where they can use it in left-handed mode or right-handed mode. We built that in from the ground up because that, from a usability standpoint, from a patient adoption standpoint, that ended up being a very critical thing. We wouldn't have known that unless we actually observed how these patients actually interact with our technology. That went way beyond any clinical trial or evidence that you generate. So those are the kinds of things that you have to really pay attention to.
You know, there was a good point that Veera made on kind of the difference between academia and industry, and that is like efficacy is not enough, or diagnostic accuracy is not enough. You actually have to make a strong economic case for why this tool or treatment should be used. And so that gets into not just will payers pay for this because they'll save money, but how does that affect revenue at a primary care setting? So these are sorts of considerations that are challenges that industry has to deal with that are beyond just the basic science of what's the signal you're measuring and how can you kind of take that and do something useful with it. The other point that I liked was, focusing on the individual instead of group level, right? Like you can, get statistically significant group level results, but, a lot of things like you're not getting diagnosed based on, group level results. You're getting a diagnosis based on an individual person. And so you have to have enough power in that individual model or the model to predict what's happening with that individual. And so this is looking at things like test-retest reliability, making sure that the metrics that you generate are consistent for the same person under the same conditions time and time again, so that you're actually measuring either changes in drug effect, as we were talking about partnering with pharma companies, you want to see that, the changes in your measure come because of an intervention, or changes because the person's actual clinical state has changed and improved through whatever intervention or healing. So I just thought I would highlight those two cases because I agree both of those are challenges for industry for sure.
Yeah, I think we heard about two kind of complementary models to really investigate kind of this concept of neuroscience in the everyday world. One was really to record large amounts of data in the real world, behavioral data, to teach us something about how the mind works. And in this context, I think one of the things that's challenging that I've seen in the academic environment is that it's quite difficult to do that because it's considered to be an invasion of privacy to a certain extent. And even though we walk around all day with phones, that are collecting vastly more data on us, and we give that data away to companies every day. So I think that's kind of this sticking point, which I still think has to be worked out from an academic perspective. And then the other one is that when you think about actually collecting some of the neural data associated with it, it's really challenging to do that with non-invasive technology, kind of the fidelity needed. And you can solve that in one of two ways. One is just collect vastly more data with vastly more patients, with high SNR, things, like if it's FNERs or EEG, or maybe there's a leap in technology that has to happen, or the invasive world, and I've highlighted some of the challenges there. And it's quite challenging in regular kind of academic projects to just collect these amounts of data. We talked about that earlier in an academic setting. It's extremely expensive, and you need to do it in a volume that any one academic lab isn't used to doing. And the model of academia of essentially not collaborating and taking a very long time to kind of publish large data sets probably needs to be updated in that regard to really advance the field meaningfully, I think.
Thank you. I see there's a first question.
Changing topics a little. One thing that was discussed a little bit today was neurosensing for feedback, and I just had the idea listening to the constant therapy idea. I mean, that's kind of, that's at scale, right? That app is reaching a very large group. So I'm just wondering, could you imagine some sort of consumer level neurosensing, be it non-invasive or invasive, that could benefit the patients you're reaching, right? And if so, how?
Yeah.
How from a market pathway, how does that work? Right?
Yeah. So in our case, what we're really doing is we're measuring. We present patients with exercises that they need to do, and sometimes they're answering questions by interacting with the screen or speaking to the to the program. And we collect, if you can, you might call that behavioral data. It's not exactly behavioral data, but it's really not putting a device inside your brain or even a FNERS kind of a thing where we are measuring neural activity. We're not doing that. Some of the things that we've been So we've always wanted to integrate with other types of signals, if you will, that can be more easily measured. So some of the challenges related to it, and you asked the right question, how, is that there are two problems that we would have to solve at scale. One problem is that you have to make it as simple as possible to deploy that technology. So even a simple thing like, I mean, I'm calling it simple, but it's not necessarily that simple. Simple thing like, okay, measuring gestures. So a lot of organizations ask us, hey, can you also measure using the camera or some other mechanism to be able to gestures so that we can do physical therapy or add that to the process. Now that the technology is getting more and more commoditized, where you can actually have the front-facing camera that's available in many of these devices, and the processing power on these things we carry around is advanced significantly. Now, I would say in the last couple of years, it is at a point where you don't have to really send them another device to connect with the phone or connect with something else in their home. Those kinds of additional steps turn out to be challenges. So the more and more commoditized things that are available as part of things people carry around, the easier it is to actually get adoption. So if there's sensors that become part of, like the wearable, Apple Watches or similar watches, if we can use those to be able to collect data, it'll be much easier than to actually add one more thing that they have to get. The other part to it is, how do you get paid for it? Which is the elephant in the room. It turns out that is way too complicated. In the U.S., there's all kinds of. Oftentimes, the best way I think about it is, it's not always aligned with the patient's interests. It's aligned with how the money flows, and so the way solving that part requires working through reimbursement codes and things like that, which depends on the specific application. So I would say those are the two things to think about. How do you reduce the friction, and how do you and you can do it, but one approach is to wait for the first part is to wait for commoditization of some of that technology, so it's easier to adopt. And on the reimbursement side, that's a whole I don't know how to solve that really.
I think Teresa also laid out a good list of some of the challenges for bringing technology out and kind of using it, even in small numbers in the home. And we've really focused on using our technology in the clinic today because we think you can learn a lot. I think, as all of you probably know, you can learn a lot just by seeing how people in more controlled settings are using your device. And I'll give an anecdote, which we've been running a study on cognitive impairment in neurology clinics, and we noticed at one point that some of the signal we were getting from the prefrontal cortex was not showing up in the data that we expected it to, and narrowed it down to a single site and a single operator. And then we had our team go visit that site and see that operator practice, and they were putting the helmet on at the hairline. So they weren't even measuring the part of the brain that we cared about. And so this is someone who'd been trained to operate the device and needed to be retrained, and there's this whole thing. And so just kind of thinking about these types of problems and getting these technologies out into home use or more mass market use, I think there's a lot that needs to be done to figure out how to make it easy, I think is the thing, is easy to use in real world settings where it's almost foolproof, because you can't require a really high level of technical expertise if you're going to use it at that scale.
Yeah, I mean, we've approached it by being direct to new consumers. So we have patients that are using existing devices, as we heard, and that means our install bases, especially in the U.S., is very, very large, and patients can download it right now and get some utility from it. I think the scaling of it and getting paid for it, part of it, is incredibly important, and we've approached it really from a care management perspective. So we're working with very large integrated healthcare systems, where essentially what we're trying to do is increase capacity, augment capacity, for these clinicians. So there's a lack of specialists in all fields, but specifically neurologists, movement disorder specialists. So being able to make sure that the clinicians see the patients that they need to, because we have digital therapeutics that are giving a pulse on their patient population, and then maybe see the patients that they can only see like once a year, once every 2 years. I think that's been really impactful, and we were hearing that from patients, and we're hearing that from clinicians. So I think that's kind of been our approach to it, and kind of the way we talk about it is really like a continuous glucose monitor for Parkinson's patients, just like patients can measure their insulin levels, and we're familiar with that as a concept. Then we really believe in showing patients their own data. We talked about this a lot in various contexts because they're the best judge of how that can be useful to them. And we have a very active patient advisory board, and then a much larger group of 300 or so patients we call explorers that are kind of our constant sounding board on new features and really showing them data and ways to interpret that. And that's really been helpful.
I think I'll just grab the fourth microphone. Thank you. Do you have a question? You want to continue then please?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you for being here and presenting your work. I think one recurrent theme that in today's presentation was kind of obvious was that there's like a general lack of data set availability, right? So if you're a research group, you generally lack the funding sources to collect huge amount of data sources. Now you working in the industry, you don't have to pay to get data, but you're basically getting paid to get data. So my question was in the context of information transfer between industry and academia, what's your opinion about data sharing, like open data, open access data? Yeah, that would be my question.
I'm happy to start. I mean, we're actively pursuing it. So, for example, in Parkinson's, there's a very large data set called the PPMI, the Parkinson's Progression Marker Initiative. And, we're trying to get a lot of the patients that have contributed data in kind of much more invasive metrics, like, CSF collection and blood work and stuff like that, to also contribute their digital data to put those two things together. And then the entire community would get it. So I think there's kind of, at least in our case, a really win-win situation there with allowing people, the entire community, to get access to this data, because I don't think it's true that we're not resource constrained. I think we're even, to a certain extent, more resource constrained because everything that we do has to have an economic justification. So by letting the research community access kind of the data and prevent us from going down kind of rabbit holes that we don't need to be going down, I think that there's a win-win there, but I realize that not all companies have that same philosophy.
Yeah, it's complicated. And, we actually don't get paid to collect data. We spend a lot of money collecting data, paying clinical sites to, recruit patients, measure patients, give us clinical data, measure the patients. And so it's very expensive for us to actually gather data sets, and we're privately funded and doing this. And so it's hard for me to go to my board and investors and say that, like, all this data that you gave me, a couple $1 million to collect, I'm now going to make open and freely available so other people can generate IP out of it. It's very complicated, right? Like, obviously, science can advance faster that way, but from an industry perspective and kind of the ROI that investors are looking for, they expect Kernel as a company to, hold the IP that's generated from our data. It's very different if we were to say, give someone a headset and they were to, go and collect their data and they wanted to make the data publicly available. We'd support that. Completely. It's just, the data that we pay to collect, it's hard for us to justify making it open source until we're a little bit more established and further along where, we're able to return some of that investment.
Yeah, for us, it's been a little bit different situation in that, there's two types of data collection that happens. First of all, I don't agree with you that we get paid to collect data. I completely agree with Ryan. You're spending your sweat, blood, and tears and much more to get something into the market. And the data part of it, in our case, feeds our we call it the AI, our AI engine to be able to better help the patients. But there are two types of things that are happening with constant therapy. From our perspective, I can say one is, there are researchers, clinical as well as more basic science research, where they want to use our platform to collect data. And we are very open to collaborating, partnering with organizations. In fact, many of the studies that have been done using the constant therapy platform, we've pretty much supported all of those initiatives. It's a win-win. It helps us to get more evidence collected for whatever specific area that the researcher is looking to study. So that's one type of data collection, and we make a program available as a platform for that. The other is, the data that's been collected using our platform in various situations. We have to actually be very cognizant of under what circumstances has it been collected. So, for example, if a health system is using our program as a platform, they don't necessarily, we have a contract with them. We can't actually just take that, turn around and take that data and just provide it to researchers. We would have to honor obviously the contract terms and conditions. So there are different situations under which data is collected. In general, what we've found is that we are able to take a large volume of our data de-identified and be able to use it at a population level to do research and analysis. And I showed an example of that. We do a lot, we've attempted, or we have done some of that ourselves, but we recognize that we can actually benefit science at large if we can open that up. And we've been partnering with universities to open that up, and obviously we want that data to be used in a way that is going to respect patient privacy and so on. So, so we partner with organizations that can use it, and we freely make it available in those cases.
Okay, I see Matthias has a question.
Yeah, I have a question, probably a very different area, but one thing that I really personally love about this area, like neuroscience in the everyday world, is it's so interdisciplinary, right? So we bring together people like engineers, researchers, clinicians, whatever, experts in ethics, like many, many different groups, right? But from my personal work, I also realized that it's a major challenge to have these groups of people talk with each other and kind of get to one, I don't know, product outcome whatsoever, right? So I guess I'm just curious about your thoughts, like what can we do? What can we do better? I mean, part of this is why I guess why we're having this conference and why we're so happy to have you here and to have everybody here, right? But I would love to hear your thoughts about what can we do to make these different groups with different backgrounds, sometimes different goals, talk with each other, or how you've navigated that kind of process in your companies.
I guess I can start. So I think it's challenging, as you said. Like everyone speaks slightly different languages, but it's gatherings like these and similar things where you have like this common interest of kind of bringing neuroscience into the everyday world. You have clinical needs and people who represent those clinical needs. You have people developing the technologies that are doing the fundamental neuroscience. And so I think it's more of these gatherings, and I would almost turn it back around to you and say, like, how as industry can we be more involved to, be here to engage and like make sure we're helping solve the right problems. I mean, obviously we know what problems we're trying to solve, but I think each kind of in the academic sphere, like you guys have your own set of problems and challenges that you're thinking about in the future that maybe aren't yet at this commercial viability stage, but are interesting nonetheless, and maybe we could do more to collaborate. But I don't know. And yes, we have I think at least Kernel, I think we have a history of being very secretive and quiet and not very transparent with the things that we're doing. But I've been working pretty hard to change that image over the last 18 months in my role. So yeah, I don't know, just open to feedback.
I can add a couple of things. One is by the very nature of what you described, which is accurate. One thing that really helps is for each of the disciplines to try to understand a little bit more about what the challenges are. So we talked from an industry perspective, we talked about the fact that it's really hard to measure. That's science and industry, really hard to actually get the right signal when you're talking about neuroscience, especially in the everyday world, right? And when multiple disciplines are working together, one thing, for example, that would be really helpful, especially at the research clinical stages, is if there are efforts put in to be able to work with noisy information, incomplete data, not you take that into account in the earliest phases. That would help, right, for us to be able to talk to each other. And the other thing that we've found is I actually find myself doing this constantly. I'm an engineer by background and by my passion, but I'm constantly playing quarterback to try to figure out how a clinical organization, where I have really no background in, where we're working with other folks, how can we help them to really solve some of their problems? So really taking that extra step and understanding the other disciplines, what are the challenges there, that would really help to really bring things together. And conferences like this are very useful to do that.
I think that was good.
Okay. Don't see anybody right now. I have a, well, again, a rather broader question about, I mean, you started already talking about, what would be nice in the interaction with academia, but also we have several horses we could bet on right now. There's, big things happening. You could say there's, innovation in non-invasive brain imaging. There's innovation in invasive brain imaging. Maybe we don't need non-invasive at some point anymore. How many years in the future, we don't know. AI is a big thing. So I think the question is, do you have, personal opinion or so, what innovations might happen or, should happen to progress this, rather broad field towards functioning, right? I mean, as you just mentioned, Veera working with incomplete data, increasing SNR, but so do you have any particular directions that you think would be good to see progress in, particularly for your solutions, for example?
I guess I can start again. I mentioned this in the intro I gave. I think that the big thing for us is finding applications where we can actually pull these technologies into the everyday world, right? I think it's different when you're trying to push technologies into the world and say this is a great technology, you should all use it. It's a difference when there are people that have a need and they say I really want your technology to solve my problem. And so I think it's all about trying to find these applications and develop enough evidence along those lines that people want to pull it in. So it's a non-answer, I guess, but it's I'll say I believe there's a lot of potential for non-invasive technologies, and especially in the everyday world for the foreseeable future, and that I think one of the biggest challenges that Kernel has had is deciding which applications to focus on first, because you can do so many things with a non-invasive brain measurement. And so we picked two, but those aren't the only two you could do. And I think the field can do a lot more work in kind of furthering applications and really showing what's possible in other spaces.
Yeah, so from a clinical, you talked about invasive, non-invasive, it's a lot easier, just intuitively, logically, it would be a lot easier to get a non-invasive type of a system to take it all the way to market and have impact. But obviously there's a lot more fidelity and precision in terms of measurement and what you can actually achieve with invasive, and the impact can be significant. So I don't know that, I don't have a specific opinion there, but it's very, each one has its own merits. The biggest challenge is really, in terms of if you think about what is being done in the research setting or the lab setting, and if you ultimately everybody wants that maximum impact, the biggest challenge to be solved is not scientific at all. I think it's really around figuring out what is it going to take to get to that mass adoption. And I really do think, from everything we have seen, at least in our little world with constant therapy, that being able to work with inexact science is really something that is very important. Patients really want. We find patients coming to us and saying, "Yeah, it's okay if that brain fingerprint you're showing is not exact. At least that's better than what I'm able to get on a regular basis from anything else." So that is better than the alternative from the patient's perspective. The question is how do you, how do you keep improving that, and how do you get it in front of the patients?
Yeah, it's hard to know to predict the future there. I mean, I think on the non-invasive side, when you think about, for example, TMS for depression, and on the invasive side, if you think about deep brain stimulation for epilepsy, for example, it just doesn't work for everyone. And the market size is such that, you have to follow multiple other first-line therapies before you're even considering, one of these other therapies, even like TMS, which is non-invasive. So, I think one of the big challenges is both the market size and also, how to maybe potentially combine some of these things together. So if it's medication and a non-invasive therapy, or medication and invasive therapy, in a way that you get enough of an efficacy jump that the patients and the clinician will want to go through, for example, an invasive procedure, and it makes a meaningful difference in their life. And that's, I think, the central challenge there, from a regulatory perspective, for sure, but also in terms of the development of some of these therapies.
So you all did user studies before you deployed your products. And I'm wondering if you're all doing continual user testing, if you're doing an evolutionary design where you're incorporating new user testing results and iterating. And is this a continual process or not, rather? So I'd like to ask each of you.
Overwhelmingly, yes, for us. It's a continuous process, and we, pretty much everybody who is part of our company, actually, we force folks to, so we have a customer success team where patients can call in. Just imagine the following situation, patients who can't talk, how do you actually help them on the phone? We actually have a process for them to call us, and we can help them. Those kinds of things we would have never been able to do if we actually didn't have a continuous process to collect data. In fact, that has become one of the engines for us to collect the data. We're constantly getting patients and clinicians telling us what they need and what they want, and that's how we improve our user experience. If you have an FDA-approved product, that process of continuous evolution is a little bit more challenging. It's not as simple as you can just put out a new software release or a new hardware and put it out in front of users. So there's a more rigorous process that one has to follow. So there are constraints around how continuous you can make that, but ideally that's what you want, and we're doing that at scale.
Do you observe them, or you're just hearing what they tell you?
What is the?
So are you observing their use, or
Yeah.
are you just
Hearing feedback? Yeah, no, we are. So when we started out, we did observe, their use, and we do have clinicians who are observing use, and they provide real-world feedback to us. And we are not. We are doing continuous testing in terms of just listening to their signal, not just from them telling us, but also other means.
And our users are like clinical staff today, so not end users, but the people that are measuring them. And I think we survey and provide questionnaires to them to get feedback on what their experience is like. And the thing I got reported to most recently was that our technology is easier to use than Microsoft Excel, but not as easy as Google. So we're somewhere in that window today, and we're going to strive to be as easy as a Google search.
Yeah, I mean, we're a patient-facing app. We do it all the time. I mentioned our patient advisory board. We also work closely with clinicians that are evaluating the kind of strengths of our report. We also look at the revealed preferences compared to what people tell us. So because it's an app, we can measure what people are actually doing, what screens what they're clicking on. So that's we have a team of designers and engineers that work on that. And then for the regulated things, as we talked about, we had to work with Apple and the FDA to ensure, for example, that the models that are passively estimating patient symptoms are clear, and that if there's a change, that we're aware of that, and we had to kind of commit to that. So that was an important piece of what we're doing.
Okay, thanks.
Few more minutes. Okay, good.
So interesting. Thank you. I'm curious. So I think it's a good idea to point out that continued support for small companies that, go out on this limb and then fail. Like freehand. I mean, I don't know if any of you remember the freehand, but we all thought that was a sure thing. Anyway, the idea of starting a foundation, which was Hunter Peckham's, I don't know whether you guys have thought about, I mean, you're all a little bit different, but whether you've thought about continual support, whether you think, so 3 things, whether you think there's an intrinsic difference in creating a company that uses the brain, and how that's either perceived or real. And the 3rd thing is, do you think that there's a special relationship that needs to develop with training for all your devices? That, I mean, so, as intuitive as the software that you showed seems to be, you're still talking constantly to people, and what is that relationship? So I guess those 3 things. Yeah.
Could try to answer some of that. I think that there's a distinction that has to be made between patients that are trial participants versus a product in the real world. So trial participants, the paper that I flashed there that was written by Mike Oken and Tim Dennison about device abandonment said that has to be part of the budget for the trial. That's something that we did when I was at UCSF as well. So if funding ran out for the company, then there was money set aside essentially to continue support for the kind of lifetime of the device. Once you're outside of a trial participant and it's an approved therapy, then I think that to a certain extent it becomes kind of a market question. Companies would pull drugs off the market if they're not economical anymore, and it can be for a variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, I think if something is really efficacious and it is really helping patients, then the insurance companies tend to pay for it, and patients also tend to vote with their feet. But and if it's not, and it's kind of on the margin, then I'm sure that some patients that do find a benefit would be harmed by it. But overall, I'm hoping that it doesn't happen.
Okay, there's one more.
So I have a question about precision medicine and precision neurology. So Roon, you say, is a precision neurology company. And in general, my second question is about healthcare moving to precision medicine. So what your thoughts are about that?
I tried to articulate our philosophy there. I mean, I think the way that manifests itself. So I gave an example, for example, of the work that we're doing with a large integrated kind of healthcare company. So what that really looks like in the real world is we can measure from your iPhone if you're falling more frequently. And one of the most common causes of disability in Parkinson's patients are ER visits and falls that really cause kind of loss of mobility and that kind of deteriorate from there. So we try and catch that early, and we have like a red flag report where we'll send that to a clinician, and then we'll send the patient as well. Here are some of the resources you have access to you may not be aware of. If it's PT, if it's maybe we want to look into medication adjustments, here's how to talk to your clinician. So these are all very simple kind of behavioral nudges on an individual basis that are trying to kind of get patients to interact with kind of a certain activity. So I think that's what that looks like in the real world in our case. And then the other place where that manifests itself is when it comes to recruitment into clinical trials. So because we have this whole kind of population level data, and one of the talks mentioned that before, we can look at some of these kind of percentiles and say, okay, you look like these other patients, and that really helps when you're trying to control for some of the heterogeneity when you're kind of testing a new drug, for example.
Yeah, and I'll add, I mean, we kind of do the precision medicine thing as well, especially in our depression work. There's been a lot of great fMRI research that's shown there are signatures of the brain that predict response to different treatments. And we really think of ourselves as an opportunity to translate some of that work, obviously with some limitations, not seeing the whole brain, lower spatial resolution, et cetera. But it's a form factor that actually lends itself well to being used in real clinical practice. And to have precision medicine, you have to have access to these tools when the numbers of patients who are affected are in the hundreds of millions. fMRI isn't necessarily the best approach for doing it. So we're trying to provide an alternative that can be used where patients are coming in already.
And definitely precision or personalized medicine, precision medicine is really the way the trend is, and we are seeing that with what we're doing. I think the key is, you want to, we can advance the standard of care to be more precision medicine than it is today, and you keep getting better and better resolution on that over time, and that's what we're seeing. We are using data at large to be able to do that, and it definitely is makes a huge difference in patients' lives.
Thank you. Okay, we're out of time, so make very short maybe if you have one last question then.
I was curious what you wish you knew before getting into translating each of your respective things, like either on the industry side, like the FDA side, or the neuroscience side, or the patient side. It's a kind of open-ended, but.
Just for our virtual listeners, because maybe the microphone was off, so the question was, what you wish you knew before you started your endeavors?
So I would answer that as an entrepreneur, and this is probably true for any founder, CEO. I heard the NVIDIA CEO Jensen talk about the same thing. I wish well, actually, maybe I don't wish I knew this, but it's much harder than it appears. It just everything takes much longer, costs a lot more money than you imagine it to be. But in many ways, so I didn't know this intellectually. I knew it, but I didn't actually know it to be true as we were starting. But maybe in many ways it was a good thing. That naivety probably helped to change aspects of the field.
Yeah, I know I enjoy learning. So if I knew it all from the start, what would I have learned? So it's been fun and hard. And part of the reason I got into this field, as an engineer, I left working on sensors for cars to work on sensors for brains, because I thought working on sensors for brains was a much harder problem, and I just wanted something fun and hard to work on. So,
Maybe because I'm a little bit younger in my career, and I know there's a lot of academics here, there's always this perception that, the research industry is different from the research in the academic world. And, I wish I knew how many parallels there are and how much translation there is between those two fields. I thought I would be working a lot less with patients when I moved to industry, and I ended up even working more with patients. So I think that's one of the things that I enjoy the most.
Okay, thank you. This was a very nice and complementary perspective. Yeah, thanks. Let's thank the panelists. Of course, that is the theme of this of Neuroscience in the Everyday World Conference. We can continue discussion and networking across the sessions. And so now there is the reception and poster viewing starting now until 6:30. And I think then that's it for today. So thank you.